Welcome to episode 50 of FBI Retired Case File Review with Jerry Williams. I'm a retired agent writing crime fiction inspired by actual FBI cases. And before I do my introduction of the show's topic, I want to introduce my guest, Bobby Chacon. Hi, Bobby.
Hi, Jerry. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Now, the listeners might not remember this, or if they're new to the show, they don't know that I actually interviewed you on episode 8.
Yes.
So I'm glad to have you back.
Thanks for having me back.
On that episode, I interviewed you about working Jamaican drug gangs and also leading the FBI dive team. If you haven't listened to it, then you want to go back and listen to episode 8. So, did you hear what I said in the introduction about this being my 50th show?
Yes, I did.
Yeah, I'm just so excited about that. This time last year, I didn't have a podcast, and I didn't have a published crime novel, so what a difference a year makes.
Well, congratulations on all the success.
Thank you. Thank you so much. As a matter of fact, on Saturday, I would have had about 375,000 episodes downloaded.
Wow.
I say that
That's amazing.
Yeah, so I want to say to those of you out there listening, thank you so much. I'm so grateful for your support. I'm so thankful that you're listening, and I hope you continue to do so. So I wanted to do something special, Bobby, for this 50th episode.
Okay.
And last night I was in New York. I had been invited by the Mystery Writers of America, the New York chapter, to speak to them. And in doing these episodes, every time, and I'm sure we did it on your episode, you know, I'm talking to the retired agents, and either one of them says or I say, you know, it's not like on TV, or, you know, what a cliche, how they have it in books. Have you ever done that?
Oh, sure, absolutely.
I talked to the Mystery Writers of America about the FBI and books, TV, and movies, and I came up with 10 cliches and misconceptions. And they told me that my talk was very good. As a matter of fact, in mystery writer lingo, they said I killed it.
No pun intended.
Yeah, no pun intended. So I wanted to do this episode, and I started to record it just by myself. And I can tell you, I was bored just listening to me go on and on and on. And I thought, who could I bring on to have a lively discussion about this topic? And the first person I thought about was you, Bobby.
Oh, thank you.
And you know why? Well, you know.
I think so.
Yeah, you know why. But I'll tell the listeners why. It's because Bobby is actually a technical advisor for the TV show Criminal Minds Beyond Borders, and Bobby also is a frequent commentator on CNN and Fox News. So I know you know
others.
Among others. So I know you know how to tell it like it is.
Sure, and I think this is a great and fascinating topic.
Good, I do too. So we all know how you hear about attorneys. You know, they don't like to read or watch legal dramas. And you hear about doctors and how they avoid, you know, watching medical shows and reading medical novels. What would you say FBI agents feel about shows about the FBI?
Well, yeah, and I can tell you this myself. I mean, we all have the same frustrations and scratch our heads and say, how can anyone believe this kind of stuff? And you know, and I was among that group as well, you know, when I was working and shortly after I retired. But I must say that, you know, now that I'm, you know, looking at it from the other side, I do understand a lot of times the, you know, creative compromises that have to take place to get it done. And now as a beginning, you know, a very rookie writer for television, you know, really coming up against a lot of those, you know, compromises that just must have to be made, you know, during the creative process. And when you only have 42 minutes, you know, to get things said and done in a 1 hour drama.
Would you agree then that when you're writing a TV show, you're writing it more for the general audience? You're not writing it for the professional FBI agent?
Absolutely. You know, the story, you know, as a writer, the story always comes first. And the legal details or the minutia is usually filled in second to give, the story a little richness and a little depth. But the story always has to come first.
Okay. I agree, and I understand creative license. In my own crime novel, I have the FBI agents doing things that would get real FBI agents in some serious, serious trouble. So I do understand that. But I do want to bring up the point that most people never get to meet an FBI agent. So the only connection that they have with the FBI are the ones that they make through books and TV and movies. So when a portrayal of an FBI agent is a cliche or it's not accurate, does it really matter?
Well, I mean, worse yet, not only do most reviewers have never met an FBI agent, most writers have never met an FBI agent. Even on the shows, even some shows that I work on, I'm sometimes the first, FBI agent that they've met. So even the writers that are writing these stories and writing some of these shows, now luckily there's more and more of us retired FBI people going into this field, and hopefully more and more will actually be writing some of this stuff, which is really where we'll make a difference. But some of these, and so when a writer has never met an FBI agent, their only reference point is other FBI agents they've seen in other movies and other television. So those same mistakes get perpetuated,
over and over
again.
Yeah, I'd like to, to bring up the fact that, if somebody out there only knows the FBI from books and TV shows, that when an FBI agent actually, knocks on their door or comes to their business or, calls them up on the phone, then the way that they respond or decide to cooperate is going to be influenced by that last book they read or that last TV show they watched.
Absolutely. And a juror sitting in a jury box is going to have the same reaction if they've never met an FBI agent and the first time they see one or meet them is to, a case that we're prosecuting, and if the FBI agent's the lead investigator, he's maybe sitting at the prosecution table, and he may be a prominent witness in the case, and and all of those things come into play. Even in a juror's kind of perception of the FBI or the FBI agent, they might have some preconceived notions that are not based in fact at all.
That's an excellent point. All right, so let's get into these cliches and misconceptions that I came up with. Okay, so we can agree that FBI agents and FBI cases are often used as inspiration for writing, thrillers and crime stories and TV shows. But here's my question to you. The FBI has jurisdiction over 200 categories of violations of federal law. We agree about that?
Absolutely.
Okay, so answer me this. Why are there so many novels and movies, might be well written and entertaining, but why are there so many about FBI agents hunting down serial killers?
Yeah, I thought about this when I read your blog, and I think it's more the public's appetite in this topic, and I think the writers that write these things, they want to throw an FBI agent in because oftentimes their main antagonist is a killer that's going across state lines or across country lines, and I think it's just the popular genre, whether it started, it probably didn't start with Silence of the Lambs or Manhunter or things like that, but those things, when they became so popular, Hollywood is a sequel business, and it's they want to copy success of other things, and when certain things become popular, then it explodes into its own genre, and all of a sudden now everybody wants to talk about serial killers.
Okay, but I do need to clear that up just a little so that people don't think that's, reality, because serial killers are relatively rare.
Absolutely. I mean, I've worked in 27 years. I think I worked one serial killer case. It happened to be one towards the end of my career, but I think I worked one, and I was very peripherally involved in a second in 27 years. Yeah,
and 26 years in my career, I can only think of one or two agents that I knew personally that ever worked a serial killer case. But I just want to make sure that people don't, they don't have that false impression that there are serial killers, lots and lots of them roaming around the country, and that FBI profilers are actively involved in those type of investigations. Now, you have one of your partners that you do a lot of things with on TV and on podcast, is a profiler. And of course I have, my buddy too, Jim Fitzgerald.
Sure.
And Tell me, just if you could tell the listeners a little bit more about the work that they do, because it's important and it's serious and it's comprehensive, but it is not running down alleys, chasing down serial killers.
Far from it. I mean, really what our behavioral analysis unit at Quantico does is they are a bunch of criminal profilers as they call, but they are basically, people with psychological backgrounds in education and training. And a lot of them are psychologists and things like that. And they basically stay at Quantico for the most part. Sometimes they go out to the field and talk to the investigators.
And sometimes they actually go out to the penitentiaries and actually interview the serial killers.
Right, and that's more for background and their own kind of field education than it is for crime fighting.
Mm-hmm.
Their role in crime fighting is really they'll get a guy like me who was used to be a very street level investigator, and I've got a series of crimes committed by who I think is the same person, and I can send a lot of and I can't figure out who this is or why they're doing it. I send them as much information as I can, and really they work off of paper. They read a lot of reports, they read a lot of interviews, they read a lot of they basically wade through mountains of paper and they see what you have and they create a psychological profile, sometimes based on victimology, sometimes based on the crimes themselves, whatever they can work with and whatever you can give them. And then they give you back, they send back basically a report. They don't come up, they don't travel, they don't hop in a private jet and go flying off. They send you a report that says, hey, based on the information you've given us, we think your criminal, it fits this type of profile. Male, white, mid-30s, college educated, lives at home, whatever. All of the different things that they can come up with. And, and surprisingly, they are, surprisingly accurate most of the time. But they're not the guys that are, strapping the guns on and hopping into a private jet and chasing people down. They are a tool that a seasoned investigator out in the field uses. But, one of many tools like a crime scene team or like a surveillance team. The profilers are just one piece of one tool in a toolbox that a field investigator out there somewhere who has many tools that he uses to build his case.
Right. And actually, there are about 15 or 20 full-time special agent profilers down at Quantico and the BAU, and there are 13,500 FBI agents. And I can tell you that 99% of those 13,500 FBI agents are not hunting serial killers. Terrorists, maybe, but not serial killers.
Well, and I don't want to diminish their work at all in any way.
No, absolutely not.
A friend of mine too, Jim Fitzgerald, who you mentioned earlier, a friend of yours. You take an example of Jim was literally taken out of Quantico and detailed out to San Francisco to the the Unabomber task force and worked on that and, basically invented the field of forensic linguistics when he analyzed the writings of the Unabomber and basically built a profile based on the Unabomber that was surprisingly and unbelievably accurate when the guy was eventually caught. So, Jim did go out in the field and work with the task force out there and things like that. So there are times when those guys do deploy, but it's never really, as you see it in some of these TV shows, as a team of profilers who goes out and, and then gets involved in the investigation and the surveillance and the interviews and the actual arrests and all that stuff. It's I've never personally heard that paradigm actually happening in my career.
Right. Okay, so let's move on to cliché misconception number 2. And this is one that really, really gets me, and that's that the FBI doesn't play well with others. I mean, how many books have you read where there's like a local detective or a sheriff and he's working on the case, and then the FBI shows up and is rude and condescending? I mean, that storyline has been portrayed for so long. It's another thing that's kind of self-perpetuating.
Yeah, and unfortunately, you're right. I mean, and I think it does. This is one that infects our relationships because people, it's, art imitating life or vice versa. And I think that this is something I battled when I first came in the mid 80s in the FBI and working in New York City, you had a lot of old seasoned detectives that, would say, the FBI's here, whatever. And I think that was maybe a vestige of the old days, but certainly in the 30 years since I've been in, it's not the case. But I think writers use it as a weak way to bring conflict into their stories. They want that conflict. Every story needs conflict. And so, this is a very weak cliche that writers still rely on to bring in conflict. But, I can tell you, some of my best partners that I worked with in my whole career were detectives and was, maintained friendships. And, and so I never encountered this. In fact, when I was with the dive team, on at least 2 occasions, I can tell you that our dive team went into a high profile case, made the recovery of the victim, and never told anybody we were there. We gave it to the local dive teams because it was their jurisdiction. We did the recovery. We gave the credit to them. We left town without ever taking credit, without ever anybody knowing we were there.
And in my career, because I worked economic crime, I worked many, many cases. My partner, my co-case agent, was either a postal inspector or an IRS agent.
Sure.
So, this is, just an unfortunate cliche that's out there. And because of this stereotype, sometimes we have to deal with that, like you're talking about.
Absolutely.
Because that police officer or that detective has seen those same movies, have read, the same books with this stereotype. And so we have to kind of fight through their resentment and suspicion before we can even move on with the investigation.
Absolutely.
All right. We're clear on that.
Yeah.
Okay. The next cliche and misconception I'd like to talk to you about is that there is one central database.
This is one that gets me every time.
Yeah, and I know.
And this is the one really where they make the most creative compromises on, and it's one that I shake my head when I watch certain shows now on TV. In fact, some that I can't really state by name because I don't want people to get mad at me, but where the agent in the field will call back to their person in the office, and this person can type in keyboards and literally will do in 30 seconds what it would used to take me literally a year to do. That they can run somebody's criminal history, then figure out who they were cellmates with, and then figure out that cellmate's friends when they were kids. It's just crazy stuff that, and I know computers are great and people that are whiz kids with computers can find out a lot more information than I can. But some of this information that they show that can just be, obtained by the punching of a keyboard is just amazes me. I shake my head sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. NCIC, which is the National Computer Information Center, is a clearinghouse. So all the different agencies, whether they're local, state, federal, they submit that information. So NCIC is only as good as the information that's provided. But as far as military records, medical records, court documents, school records, all of those are kept in different computer files and databases.
Oh my God! I saw a show recently where it wasn't even a criminal records. The person, they called back, and while they were on the phone, the person hit their keyboard and was saying, "Well, he had an electric bill that averaged $150 a month, and then, in the last 2 months, it went up to $600 a month." And she found all that out in a few seconds. And I'm saying, I'm just laughing at the thing, and and they're like, "Oh my God!" So it doesn't only end even at like the criminal or medical records. It seems like it's it's this one. Sitting at a keyboard and they can get it. And, the problem with that is it really perpetuates the myth of this, big brother government. And so when an NSA story like the Snowden story breaks, people think that, oh my God, the government does have access to all this information and it's scary. Well, we really don't, you know what I mean? And that's one of the problems,
And the other thing is, Bobby, even if they could, would they really care about me and the average citizen, my neighbors?
We don't have enough people to chase the real bad guys. We're not going to waste our time chasing people that aren't criminals.
Absolutely. And I do want to just, say again that we are not, we're bringing up these myths and cliches. We know that because of time constraints and because, as writers, you must keep the story interesting. There must be crisis and climax and inciting incidents and all of that. But we are just kind of clearing up some of these misconceptions and cliches just so people know what the truth is and that they're not going to be bringing these cliches and misconceptions into their real life,
Oh, absolutely. I know
activities.
Firsthand. I'm actually working on a pilot right now on a show that, we just got picked up. And I am making certain, creative compromises on the investigation to move the story at a certain pace that it needs to move, because we have to hit certain beats in the script at certain points. And so one of the things I bring to the writer's room is working with these scripts and saying, okay, here's what we can inject to either speed up the investigation or slow down the investigation, because the investigation has to be at certain points during the 1 hour show that we have. And so, there are certain creative compromises that even I myself am part of making. And that's just the way it is. And I completely understand that. I completely understand the need for it. I try to personally keep it to a minimum, but, I do know that why those things need to happen that way.
Absolutely. And again, writing my first novel and writing my second novel now, I'm having to put those things in there too to make the story interesting and like you said, to keep the story moving. That's very important. Sure. All right, so let's move on to cliché and misconception number 4. And this is that FBI agents work for federal prosecutors.
Yeah, this is an interesting one, because I had close working relationships with federal prosecutors and things, but it's, it was never, and much to their chagrin, it was never really them being in charge of my investigation. I cringed when you used to hear AUSAs, federal prosecutors, say, well, my agents told me this and my agents told me that. And like, well, we're not your agents. We're the boss's agents. And so, yeah, it's, I think in this one situation, I think this is kind of where, a show like Law and Order does it well, where, their 1 hour show is breaking up the first 20 minutes. You see the investigation, just the cops. And then the middle 20 minutes, you kind of see the cops and the prosecutors doing lineups and doing interviews in the DA's office. And then the last 20 minutes are the trial, where you see the prosecutors out front. So they kind of bring it full circle in that structure.
Right. So they break it down where the FBI investigates, and then the United States Attorney's Office, the federal prosecutors, prosecute, and they work together to get to that point.
Yeah, there's a middle ground. There's a point in the beginning of an investigation where it's really just the FBI. We're just doing our thing. We're going out doing our thing. And then there's a hybrid part of it where we're working with the U.S. Attorney's Office, either through the grand jury process or through the issuance of subpoenas and bringing in witnesses into the U.S. Attorney's Office and doing interviews. That's the hybrid kind of segment of the investigation. And then you have the actual legal process where they file a complaint or information or get an indictment. And then we move into the court system where the prosecutors are then out front, but we're still there. We're sitting at the government table oftentimes at trial. We're still, intimately involved in the prosecution of the case. But, it is that spectrum where we're in charge and we're out front doing our thing pretty much on our own at the beginning. The prosecutors are pretty much doing their thing at the end. But in the middle, there's that middle ground.
And one other thing that I wanted to add, you have some books and some films that show the prosecutors coming out into the field, maybe at an arrest or at a search, and that doesn't happen either.
Yeah, I'd never had that. The most we ever had was we might have had a prosecutor at like a forward command post where we were doing a big takedown, and we might have follow-on warrants based on things that were seen. But most of the time, they're back at the office and they're at their phone and, they're ready to issue, follow-on warrants or whatever is needed during the big takedown. They're back at the office, even if they have to be there at 6 a.m. because we're doing early hits. They might be, there, but they'd be back at the office.
Right. We do not work for, and I had to tell this. This one is
really.
I had to tell that to a couple of AUSAs, and most of the time, though, and I think this is probably true for you too. You develop a great relationship with a few of the AUSAs, the federal prosecutors that you really like to work with. I had my favorites, the ones that we really clicked. And you had a case, and you would call them up and say, look, I got a case, and you would actually, get them to get assigned to that case so you can continue working together.
Absolutely. Loretta Lynch was one of mine.
Oh, really?
Yeah, she was a young prosecutor.
Name dropper.
Yeah, we worked a lot of cases together. When she became the AG, I sent her a nice email and got a nice response back and stuff.
Very nice.
Yeah.
Very nice. Yeah. All right, so cliché misconception number 5, and that's that all FBI agents work on task forces.
Yeah, this one, I have a harder time with because I myself I wasn't, I did work the majority of times on task forces, especially in New York, working narcotics and working drug gangs was on an NYPD DEA task force.
And see, for me, it was the opposite. I
Right.
worked economic fraud, so my cases were my cases, and that's the case for
Most agents.
yeah, for most of the violations that we work, agents almost have an entrepreneurial ownership of their cases. They're in charge of running their cases almost like a business. They have to decide on the manpower they need. They have to decide on the resources that they need, and it's sometimes you watch a lot of shows and you read books and they're all working on things together. In most FBI cases, you got your squad and you take your squad mate out with you definitely to corroborate things. You don't want to have an interview and you're the only one, saying that this person said that. And, of course, there are safety concerns also that you want to take another agent out with you. But for the most part, you're working that case alone. And let's talk a little bit about file reviews. How does that work on a task force?
The task force was funny. That a lot of the cops like to be on task forces because, quite frankly, the FBI carried the administrative burden of all those cases because they're really FBI cases. And so, I did all the file reviews, my cases, and I would be responsible. I had detectives assigned with me. I'm not sure how they handled their own, internal performance reviews. But the case in general, by and large, were FBI cases that were being prosecuted federally. By and large, the responsibility for the case was still mine. And especially if you got up on a Title III on a wiretap or something, it was through the federal courts, and I was the affiant on the affidavit for the Title III and stuff. So it was really all my responsibility, ultimately for that case.
Well, that's where I actually got the name of this podcast, FBI Retired Case File Review, because the case file review is an important part of being an FBI agent. And I don't think people understand that there is nobody standing over an FBI agent, checking to make sure that they do their interviews and that they, conduct a certain part of their investigation.
We have a much more flatter corporate, or if you want to, corporate or organizational structure than a police department, which is much more of a paramilitary, which is much more structured and vertical. We're much more horizontal in that,
absolutely,
down at the street level agent, you do almost all the work and you don't need a whole lot of supervision normally. And so, really between me and the entire boss of the, New York division, say, there were 4 people. There was me, my supervisor, my ASAC, and my SAC, right? In the NYPD, my partners, there was 1,000 guys between them and the police commissioner, right? So we have a much more, flatter structure. And so, down at the bottom is where all the work gets done. And so, I think that served us well. I think that's much more efficient. We were much less top heavy administratively, especially in the field. And so I don't think that's what people realize. I think that a lot of times they try to apply the structure of the military or most police organizations as they know it, and they try to apply that over onto the FBI and some of these creative endeavors that they're not familiar with. But the FBI is a much more, especially when you get out into the RAs and God knows the smaller RAs, right, where you're basically out on your own.
Right, and those are satellite offices. For those who don't know what an RA is, it's a resident agency.
Right, and these are, you work out of a headquarters, but you have smaller and smaller offices, and some of these agents work out of 2- and 3-man offices that are in the middle of nowhere, and their supervisors and their bosses are hundreds, if not thousands, of miles away sometimes. And so they're really, they work independently, and they don't have, the command structure that you would have if you were in a police department where you had, a squad leader and then a sergeant and then a lieutenant and then a captain and then a, deputy inspector and then an inspector,
Right. I worked, again, on the economic fraud squad for most of my career, and I could be working on a case, and I might not talk to my supervisor about my case until I have my 90-day file review. So 3 months later, I bring all my files, whether it's, I have 2 or 3 cases or I have 20 cases, depending on the size of the case. And I bring all my files and I put them in the supervisor's office. I go away and I come back and I sit down and we go through each case. And, he looks to see my statistics,
Mm-hmm.
how many searches, how many arrests, how many indictments, did I have any trials, were there any convictions? He'll look at all of that, and it's all recorded on an FD 515. And, it's very competitive. You want to be able to prove that you're pulling your weight.
Mm-hmm.
You could goof off if you wanted to, but, in 90 days, you got to bring those files in, and they're going to know if you're not carrying your weight.
And also another aspect of that is, and I can tell you because this is the way, one of the ways I learned the job was one of my best supervisors when I was a very young agent. He would call me in on these 90-day file reviews, and he would mentor me in those meetings. And he'd say, hey, look, if, I see what you've done here in the last 90 days. In the next 90 days, what are you planning on doing? And I would give him my investigative plan and whatever. And he would subtly go, well, you may want to try this, or you may want to think about this, or look in these terms and think, use these tools that might be available. And he would mentor me that way. And I would go out of those meetings and go, hey, and that's how I kind of learned some of my investigation. I had a mentoring supervisor that during these 90-day file reviews would come in and say, hey, look, in the next 90 days, might want to try this. And then if he had to, even in the interim 90 days, he would check up on me and he'd say, how's that going? Did you try this? How's that going? But I was left on my own to do those things. And,
Absolutely.
Then I would go out and I'd have 3 months on my own to try these different things and see what worked and see what didn't work. And that's how, trial and error, and that's how you become a great investigator.
Right. And this is also the reason why the FBI, most of the people that the FBI hires are like 29 or 30, 31 years old. They're, having been this is going to be their second career because we're looking for people who can hit the street running.
Absolutely.
Who have all these skills already. They're going to be able to take on that responsibility of running their cases, by themselves.
Yeah, the average age of my Quantico class was 29.5, I think.
Yeah, there you go. All right, let's move on to number 6. Because I love this one. There is a TV show, and again, I won't mention the TV show because it won't be fair because you work on yours, and I'm certainly not going to critique your TV show. But there's one TV show, and there's an ADIC, which is an assistant director in charge in the field, and that doesn't happen. Again, your case agent, your supervisor may go out on an arrest or a search or something, but you are not going to have a senior executive in the FBI out in the field.
Yeah, and I think this is one of those other things that differs from the police departments, at least in New York City. I remember because if there was, sometimes if an incident didn't, say a barricaded subject or whatever, which for us is a big deal, right? SWAT teams get called out. But even in a situation like that where the PD might have a captain or a deputy inspector on scene, most of the time, even the FBI only had a supervisor. And he was, of course, calling back and alerting, his bosses up the chain what was happening, but they didn't come out to the field. At most, you had a supervisor or a SWAT team leader, out in the field. You almost never had, they just didn't have a role there. Whereas because of the police department's much more structured and that way, oftentimes they would have. And I think sometimes this is also one of those mistakes where writers will take what they know to be fact in, military or police organizations and then try to apply that, put that template over onto the FBI, and it just doesn't apply.
As a case agent, we used to warn each other. If upper management came out to the scene, then you have lost all control of your case.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. It was never a good thing, right?
No, never a good thing. And you know what? I can tell you, and I'm only half joking when I say this, the reason that senior executive managers are not coming out to the field, they're not coming out to arrest, they're not coming out to a search, is because what if something goes terribly wrong? It's all about moving up the ladder, and in that game, plausible deniability is the key.
Is everything, yeah. Again, like we said, nothing could be good if they're out in the field. Well, for the same token, on their end, very little good can come out of them being out in the field, right? If something good happens, they can take credit for it back at the office behind a podium.
Yes, and they will.
Yes, they will.
Okay, let's move on to number 7. Agents use intimidation and threats during interrogation. And now you see this all the time on, cop shows where they've got a subject in and they are yelling at them and threatening them and doing all kinds of things in order to, what they think is to get them to confess.
Right. And I think this is, again, one of those compromises that could make, because some of the best interviews I've done on some of the most hardened criminals have taken me hours and hours and sometimes days and sometimes weeks, so you can't possibly show that on TV because it would be boring as heck to most people, but the real success in that endeavor comes in building a relationship with that person you're interviewing, whether you're building it, and there's many different skill sets used to build it. Sometimes it's a complete fabrication that you're making, whatever it is, whatever you find successful for that particular interview subject, whichever things you're applying to that. And sometimes it's not that honest, and sometimes it is. It depends, but it takes time to develop that rapport.
Yeah, for me, I use my charm and my skills of persuasion.
Right.
And another thing is, we don't call it interrogation.
No.
It's all an interview. It's an interview, and, when you have an adversarial confrontation with a subject, most of the time that doesn't work.
TV shows a lot of times like to put a ticking time bomb or a ticking clock on something like an interrogation. So, you have to tell me where this person is or else they'll die, right? So there's this click. But most of the time in our interviews, we don't have such a time crunch or a time requirement, which is good because you can take the time to develop the rapport. And really that's the golden thing, because ultimately what you want is you want this person testifying for you at trial. You want to flip them and have them plead guilty and then testify against the higher ups wherever you're going with the case. So really you don't want to kick them around the thing, because that's not going to get you what you want. First of all, it's illegal, right, for us, and you can't use things that you gain through intimidation or coercion. That stuff can be thrown out in a suppression hearing. But you really want the person to be on your side. You want them to join Team Fed. You want them to come over and be a witness for you and be a guy testifying against the higher ups. And you're just simply not going to get that, by doing the things that you see done on the television.
Right, and another point is that, if you're nice to this subject, the person that you're interviewing, the person that you're nice to today could become your informant tomorrow. And having informants, having cooperating witnesses is something that is part of every FBI agent's file review. They're evaluated on how many informants and how many cooperating witnesses they have, because again, people need to understand the FBI is not just a law enforcement agency, it's also an intelligence agency. So we're looking for human intelligence, we're looking for informants. And so if you treat everybody bad, they're not going to want to cooperate in the future. They may tell their friends, how bad you treated them, so their friends don't cooperate with you. Just take your time, like you said, and just talk to the person and figure out other ways of getting them to talk.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, three of the most violent, dangerous guys and Jamaican drug posse guys that I arrested became my witnesses and testified for me. They did long-term jail sentences. They went into witness protection. Two of them are in, the one's not. But I still get calls from them, and I'm retired, and I still get calls. Now I have a system set up where they have to dial into a third-party number. They don't know where I am or my phone number, but they still call me, and sometimes it's just a chat. Sometimes it's to ask questions. Sometimes it's to give me information. But sometimes it's just to say hello, and that's all born out of the relationship and the rapport that I had developed with them 25 years ago.
Right. Well, actually, I did a podcast episode with one of my cooperating witnesses. He was investigating. Yeah, I think it was episode 44. Carl Lanou, last name unknown.
Mm-hmm.
But he went to jail for business-to-business telemarketing fraud through overbilling. But we developed a good relationship.
That's great.
And, I did a podcast interview with him. So,
that's terrific.
All right, let's move on to number 8.
Okay.
FBI agents are perfect and never get in trouble. Now, I put this one in as kind of a joke because, it's kind of true. For the most part, we leave that bad behavior stuff to the Secret Service. I'm only joking. If you're from the Secret Service, I'm just joking. Yeah, unfortunately, there have been some agents who have made some serious mistakes. But the mantra. The FBI has a mantra about doing stupid stuff. Do you know what that is?
Don't embarrass the Bureau.
Don't embarrass the Bureau.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that is a core belief about behavior of agents.
And I grew up with that mantra, because I came in the FBI very early. I was 24, and while it might sound like just a bureaucratic, safeguard, And when I started mentoring younger agents and towards the end of my career, I had to tell them, and I had to press upon them that you don't embarrass the Bureau, because the Bureau's reputation is a lot of what we make our bones with in the field. When that's the reputation of walking in to an interview room and interviewing a guy that maybe knows the system and's been arrested before by the locals a lot. Now it's the FBI. That reputation you carry in was built by other agents, and it was built by them not embarrassing the Bureau. It was built by building a reputation of integrity, and that is a gift that's provided to younger agents, that was built through many, many years of hard work by other agents, and it's incumbent upon them to keep that gift safe and to provide it to the new agents when they leave the job. And so don't embarrass the Bureau is not simply a reason, it sounds simply one of these things. Don't embarrass the Bureau because we have bureaucrats in Washington who will get mad. Don't embarrass the Bureau is because our reputation over 100 years ago was built with the integrity. And then when I came in the job, a lot of the cachet that I had, from being an FBI agent came from that work and that integrity. And,
absolutely.
And so that mantra is really, important.
Absolutely. It's expected that every FBI agent, whatever they say, whatever they do, is going to project a positive image and mirror the viewpoints of the Bureau and the front office. And so, that don't embarrass the Bureau is ingrained, in every FBI agent, the way they carry themselves.
And as you know, and we get quarterly,
ourselves.
Our internal affairs is actually called Office of Professional Responsibility, or OPR. And, we used to get these quarterly OPR stuff, that would wash the names and the field offices off of it, but it would tell you the facts of a situation of somebody that got in trouble. And, sometimes you'd shake your head and say, well, how did an agent behave like this? Why did he behave like this? And so the Bureau is always reminding you of the behavior that's expected of you. And I think through the selection process of special agents in the FBI, we can weed out, some of those issues and some of those problems and keep them to a minimum. And so the hiring standards become important and those kind of things.
All right, so the next one kind of goes in that same area, and that's number 9, and it is that agents have no sense of humor. You have these books and TV shows where the agent is just blah.
Mm-hmm.
It's just a caricature of a suit.
Right.
I know that is just not the case. And I hope people get that when they listen to the podcast and listen to some of the interviews that I've done where we are joking around and telling stories. FBI agents take what they do very seriously, but they don't take themselves seriously. Now, we can joke around. Tell me about, do you know any practical jokes that have been played that you can share?
I watched a guy, take a drink from his, he was meticulous about bringing his own, water bottle from home, and he drank from it, and he only brought his, filtered ionized water from home or whatever, and, he always carried it with him wherever he was. In any meeting, he had a reputation like, he was the water boy kind of thing. And, on the one occasion that he, may have left it unattended, an agent may have taken the opportunity to pull out of his drawer a plastic bag containing ghost chilies that he had kept in there just for this occasion if it ever happened.
Chili?
Ghost chilies, they're really super hot, chilies. They're like 10 times worse than jalapenos, and may have unscrewed the lid on that water bottle and rubbed it all on the inside and the inside of where the agent would have put his lips and stuff, and we watched this guy in the middle of a meeting sweat right through his white dress shirt into his undershirt underneath, where literally the sweat stains of his chest were coming through, and where he had to excuse himself, and he didn't. And he's like, "I'm sorry, boss. I don't know what's wrong." And then somebody said, "Well, go down to the nurse's office, see if you got a fever or something." And it was all because he didn't realize he was drinking water that was washing over this ghost chili oil that they had put in. I think he ultimately left the office early that day, but it was,
that's a shame.
But, yeah.
And of course, the common prank is if you ever leave your credentials out on your desk, somebody may decide to tape maybe Mickey Mouse or Homer Simpson's photo over your photo, and you don't know it until you go to an interview and you flash your credentials, you flash your badge, and people look at you strange, and you look and you see that.
Yes, because you don't normally look at your own credentials, right? They stay in your pocket. You don't gaze lovingly at your credential photo often. And so you never open them until you're actually showing them to somebody else in an interview or, to identify yourself. And so if somebody had done that, you might never know until the next time you whip them out, really professionally and shove them in somebody's face. And then they're looking at Agent Homer Simpson.
It's all in good, clean fun. All right. Now we've come to our last one. Mm-hmm. And this cliche or misconception is that most FBI agents are white males.
Well, I think most probably are still.
I think it is about 70%.
Yes, but that number is way different than it was even when I came in 1987. So I think the Bureau is a slower adjustment to certain things, and I think that was. I remember my partner for 12 years was a female agent, and it was a female agent in our squad that she had hanging on her wall a letter that was, I think, only from like 1973 or 74 or whatever.
I have that letter.
You have it. Okay, so you know the one
that women can't join the FBI, but here are some other things that you can do that can utilize your skills, like be a secretary.
And it came from the director's office, right?
Yes, yeah. I have it too. The reason I did put this down as a cliche or misconception is not because they're not, 70% white male in the Bureau, but because, we're not that cookie cutter central casting agent that appears in TV shows and books of the past. We do have agents, 20% are women. We do have about 17% that are minority. We have agents from all religions. We have agents that are straight. We have agents that are gay. Mm-hmm. And so I do, even though, again, it's 70% white male, that there is some diversity, and the FBI is trying so hard to recruit more minorities and bring more diversity. The FBI, just like every law enforcement agency, should reflect the population it serves.
I can tell you when I came in out of the 56 field offices, I don't know that we had one female SAC, and I think the last 3 cases I worked were in 3 different field divisions that had 3 different female SACs. Yeah, and so I think it's moving in the right direction. I don't think it could ever come quick enough. But I would say that, in the 30 years since I came in the FBI, I've seen it change drastically in the right direction. I think this is one of the areas where, TV shows, they may have other problems, but, you do see more, female and minority agents represented in some of those shows.
Yeah, absolutely. But it's definitely more than in reality. Because I can tell you that as a black female, I was a unicorn.
Oh,
Black females only make up 1% of the special agent workforce. And so, again, it's an opportunity. If you know somebody or you meet the qualifications and you're listening to this, please consider applying for the special agent position.
And that's one point where, this is one area where, movies might help. If we can make those portrayals more, not acceptable, but more acknowledged, right? When you have young women out there that wouldn't have even previously considered that a career, now when they're seeing those characters played on a TV show or a movie, now they go, oh, I can do that, because obviously some of these network TV shows will get a lot more audience than a career day that the FBI holds at a local community college or a local college or whatever. And so, I think that if creatively, if some of these, books or movies or television shows get out ahead of it and make those portrayals, then I think it can have, a self-fulfilling prophecy type of thing where, it will be more, where we've talked earlier in this show about how some of these things negatively, portray and negatively get carried towards in the future. Well, this is a positive thing that if movies and television could portray these people and these roles being filled by different people, then maybe there will be people out there that watch them that go, okay, maybe I can do that as a career.
All right, so we have come to the end of the 10 cliches and misconceptions. I like to also, as a subtitle, say that this episode could be called 10 Reasons an FBI Agent Isn't Going to Read That Book or watch that TV show.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Again, because of the cliches. I did an interview with a journalist. Her name is Anya Kane for Business Insider. And she did her article on 11 things Hollywood gets wrong about the FBI and one thing they get right. And I'm going to link that to this episode's show notes. And I also did a blog post, an open letter to the writers, producers, and fans of the TV show Quantico, and I'm going to link that too. And so that has a few more of the cliches and misconceptions about the FBI.
Yeah, and I would say that, like, you know, there are a lot of us out there in the field that are working to try to change those things. It's a slow boat to turn around, and sometimes we're successful, sometimes we're not. There are shows that I've worked on that the portrayals of the agents were not accurate, and I've got emails from people who've seen my name as an advisor on the show and say, you don't know what you're doing. Why can you? And so, you know, just understand that there, you know, the tech advisor never has the ultimate say about how the portrayal is going to happen. We just advise. Advise and consent, and we don't really, you know, if you do it right and you approach it right. And I'm learning this business, and you know, you can actually have more of an influence and stuff. And if you start learning how stories can be put together, and then you can influence it in that way too. And but there are just times where, you know, where we just don't have the ability to make that, you know, make that assessment or make that call.
Okay. Well, you know where else people could go if they want to learn about how the FBI really works?
Where?
This podcast.
Of course.
Of course.
In the best possible way.
So, yeah, I created this podcast, FBI Retired Case File Review, just as something to do. You know, I don't make any money or income off it. It's just, you know, something I wanted to do. I will say, to try to build up readership and interest in my own crime novel. But the podcast episodes give listeners an opportunity to get behind the scenes and to really get an idea what it's like to be an agent. You know, and it just happened that I created this true crime fiction podcast at a time when people are really interested in true crime.
Yeah, it's exploding genre. And I will say this, I even as an FBI agent, I listen to your podcast with interest every week. To burgeoning writers out there, I would say, like, every one of your podcasts is a potential for a movie or a TV show or a book. You know, every one of these agents that you get on there and talks about these fascinating cases. And this is why even me as an agent listen to it, because there's so many areas of the bureau that I didn't work. And when I hear espionage cases or white-collar crime cases or health fraud cases, the things I didn't work, I mean, this is fascinating stuff. And I'm always entertained and intrigued by the agent's stories. And they're real. You can hear them from the people who actually were in the trenches doing it. And it's like any writer out there that, you know, is starved for, you know, ideas or something. I mean, just listen to the podcast. It's there. It's all out there, and it's coming from the real people.
Yeah, thank you. Absolutely. I call my podcast the diet or light version of true crime because, you know, a lot of true crime podcasts have all this blood and gore. Well, there's not all that blood and gore in most FBI investigations, but there's lots of intrigue and suspense. And so, we have that for you. I will want to say one thing real quick, and that is how important I believe being transparent is for the FBI right now. I mean, you know, we've taken some real serious hits on our reputation, on our integrity, you know, based on things that happen before the election, pre-election. And I think that, you know, having a transparent look behind the scenes at the real FBI, at the field office level, is more important now than ever. Don't you agree?
Oh, absolutely. And, you know, and I've kind of tried to fight back, you know, a little bit on some of these social media things and stuff where, you know, where the action of one person at the head of an agency gets applied to everyone in the agency. And that's just wrong. I mean, you and I both worked for multiple directors. We both worked for multiple presidential administrations. And we know that the working agents in the street don't change. They don't get swayed by, you know, political opinions or political ideals or anything like that. The working agents at the street level do their job without prejudice to any of the political winds that may be blowing at any given time, regardless of what, you know, people may be spouting off on social media about us as an agency. Those things do not run much deeper than the bureaucratic swamp inside the Beltway. They don't really influence the agents that are out there working in the field.
Well said. Very well said. All right, so one last thing before we go, a little lighter note. I do have to confess, you know, after this whole conversation about cliches and misconceptions, that in my crime novel, Pay to Play, it's about a female FBI agent investigating corruption in the Philadelphia strip club industry. I do have my characters doing things that would get real FBI agents in some serious trouble. You know, the book is based on an actual FBI case, but I took all the boring parts out.
Which is most of it.
All right.
Sometimes.
I think this is a wrap.
Okay.
I want to thank you, Bobby, for being on the show again.
Thank you for having me.
I also want to thank you out there for hanging out with me every week for the last 12 months. And I hope that you continue listening to FBI Retired Case File Review and that we're able to do another special episode. Maybe I'll have Bobby back when we reach episode 100.
I'd be honored.
Thank you to all of the listeners who have bought, read, and reviewed Pay to Play. I put an easy link to the Amazon sales page at the very top of this episode show notes. So I hope that you consider picking up a copy of Pay to Play. I also want to invite you to join the FBI Retired Case File Review newsletter that I send out once a month with my crime fiction recommendations, updates on what's happening with the FBI in books, TV shows, and movies, and with some of the agents featured here on the podcast. You can sign up for that newsletter on my website at jerrywilliams.com, and that's Jerry with a Jerri, Williams.com. This episode was sponsored by FBIRetired.com, the only online directory made available to the general public featuring retired FBI agents and analysts interested in showcasing their skills to secure business opportunities. I want to thank you for listening to this special 50th episode, and I hope you come back again for another episode of FBI Retired Case File Review with Jerri Williams. Thank you.